The Vraxion warship slid through the cold black of space like a silent blade. It was a vessel built for conquest, sharp lines of dark metal bristling with weapons that had leveled cities and silenced entire planets. Inside its steel heart commander, Jurok stood at the main viewport, his 4 black eyes scanning the endless stretch of stars. He had led the Vraxion military for 2 decades, never once meeting defeat. Empires had crumbled before him. Alien fleets had burned in his wake. His warriors believed him unstoppable, and Jurok had come to believe it too. But now, there was something new in his path. "Commander," the sensor officer spoke, voice low and uneasy. "We have detected a vessel, small, primitive. It is not broadcasting any recognized codes." Jurok turned. "Show me." The image blinked into life on the main holoscreen. A tiny craft, barely larger than one of the Vraxion's gunships, drifted in open space. Its hull was scuffed, paint scraped away by micrometeorite impacts. The design was crude by Vraxion standards, thick plating, bolted together like armor. From a forgotten age, it had no visible shields, no escort ships, no weapons online. It should have been dead. Yet at WASN, single quotes. Inside, Jurok could see movement, blurry shapes behind thick glass. He zoomed the view in. 2 figures sat in what looked like a command deck. Both were barefaced, breathing without any visible air filters. Their skin was pale, their hair short and dark. They were smiling. Actually smiling. They are exposed. "Too hard vacuum radiation," the science officer said, disbelief dripping from every word. "This region is unshielded. Solar wind alone should be dead," the weapons officer interrupted. Jurok's eyes narrowed. "And yet they are not." The officer swallowed. "The database marks this species as human. From a Deathworld classification tier 4 that made the bridge fall silent. Even in the Vraxion military, Deathworld classifications were spoken of in low tones. Worlds that bred creatures capable of surviving in lethal environments without technological aid. Species that evolved in chaos. Predators themselves or prey that learned to fight like predators. Most commanders avoided them entirely." Jurok had always been curious. "What are they doing?" he asked. The screen flickered, zooming in again. The 2 humans were seated in chairs, one holding a small cup, the other tapping a panel on the console.
Ow.
Then something strange happened. The human, on the left female, judging by the visible biological markers, leaned back and laughed. Laughed not the cautious, nervous kind. A deep, genuine sound. In open space. It's on an unshielded vessel that could be ripped apart in seconds by a stray meteor. Jurok's jaw tightened. They are either fools or something far worse. The science officer tapped his display. "Commander, their life support readings are unusual. Their body chemistry is tolerating radiation levels that would cause organ failure in most known species. And they are maintaining normal cardiovascular function at extremely high stress levels." Jurok studied the screen again. These were not the panicked faces of prey. These were the calm expressions of a species that had no reason to fear. "Open." "A channel," Jurok ordered. A sharp hiss filled the air, followed by a voice clear, confident, and completely at ease. "This is Captain Alina Voss of the Odyssey. Identify yourselves." The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances. Female spoke in the trade language fluently. There was no quaver in her voice, no attempt to flatter or appease. She spoke like she was in control. "This is Commander Jurok." "Of the Vraxion battle group?" he replied, his tone sharp. "You are trespassing in controlled territory. Your vessel will be boarded. Prepare for inspection." The human's lips curved into a faint smile. "You're welcome to try, Commander. But we're a bit busy at the moment." "Busy," Jurok frowned. "Explain." Before she could answer, the other human, a male with short dark hair and a square jaw, leaned into view. "We're running a maintenance check on the hull. Bit risky out here, I know, but we like a challenge. Maintenance out here. Without shields." Jurok thought of his own engineers, who would not step onto a hull without full hazard armor and a security escort. And these humans were treating it like a casual afternoon chore. Commander, the weapons officer said quietly. Their oxygen reserves are low, barely enough for another day, yet their heart rates remain steady. This is not normal behavior for any prey species. Jurek's 4 eyes fixed on the humans. Bring them aboard. Now. The Vraxion's grappling beams locked onto the human vessel, dragging it toward the hangar bay. The humans made no attempt to flee. If anything, they seemed amused by the entire process. When the airlock finally cycled open, the boarding squad was ready, plasma rifles raised, armor sealed. The humans stepped out unbound, wearing simple fabric suits. No armor, no weapons. The female scanned the hangar, eyes sharp and alert. The male gave a small wave as if greeting old friends. The squad leader stepped forward, his voice a growl. You will follow us to the commander. Sure thing, the male said icily. Lead the way. They walked between the rows of armed soldiers without a flicker of fear. Some of the younger troops shifted uneasily, unused to prisoners who didn't cower. JUROK watched them from the command dais as they entered the bridge. The female's gaze swept over the control stations, the officers, the viewport. She didn't look impressed, so she said, stopping in front of Jurek, "This is your flagship. Nice ship. Bit cold, though." He studied her in silence for a long moment. You were drifting in unshielded space without proper protection. Why? The male shrugged. We were taking a break. A break, Jurok repeated, his voice like steel. Yeah, the male said. Back home, it's normal to push yourself. Test your limits. Keeps you sharp. The science officer leaned closer to Jurek, whispering, Commander, I've run their vitals again. Their physiology is stable despite exposure to lethal conditions. They're not exaggerating. For them, this is normal. The bridge seemed to grow colder. Jurek's gaze sharpened. Normal, he said slowly, as if tasting the word. The female smiled faintly. You should see what we call difficult. For the first time in many years, Commander Jurok felt something foreign in his chest, a flicker of unease. Of their technology? Not because of their numbers, but because of the calm certainty in their eyes. Predators knew when they were facing something dangerous. And Jurek, veteran of 100 campaigns, was starting to suspect that these humans were the most dangerous opponents he had ever met. The hum of the warship's engines filled the silence as the 2 Deathworlders stood on the bridge, unarmed and unafraid, looking at the most feared commander in the sector as if he were just another obstacle in their day. And somewhere deep inside, a thought whispered in Jurek's mind, I thought he had never entertained before. Perhaps. The Vraxion were not the hunters this time. The holding cells of the Vraxion warship were designed to break spirits. Cold walls of black alloy hummed faintly with containment fields. Harsh lights cast long, sharp shadows that made the space feel smaller than it was. The floor was bare metal, no bedding, no comfort. For most prisoners, the psychological weight of the place was worse than the chains. The humans didn't seem to notice Captain Alina Voss sat cross-legged on the floor, her back to the wall, eyes half closed as if resting. Sergeant Mason Rourke paced slowly across the cell, scanning every corner with casual interest, as though inspecting the interior of a new apartment. Outside the cell, 2 Vraxion guards stood watch. Both were seasoned warriors, having served in campaigns across half the galaxy, yet they found themselves uneasy. They smiled too much. One murmured in the Vraxion tongue. They're Deathworlders, the other replied, his voice low. Maybe that's normal for them. The first guard shifted his grip on his plasma rifle. Nothing about this is normal. When Jurok arrived, the guard stiffened to attention. His eyes stayed locked on the humans as he stepped to the console. With a gesture, the containment field shimmered away. Stand, Jurek ordered. Alina opened her eyes, calm and sharp. Mason stopped pacing. Both rose without hesitation, stepping forward. You will answer my questions, Jurek said, his voice carrying the weight of command. Ask away, Mason replied easily. Jurek's gaze lingered on him for a moment before shifting to Alina. Your world is classified as Tier 4 Death World. Explain your environmental conditions. Alina tilted her head. You mean Earth? It's not so bad. bit of a mixed bag. Some places are dangerous, sure others are fine. Define dangerous, Jurak said. She began to list things in a matter-of-fact tone. Storms that could flatten cities. Seas that swallowed ships whole, deserts that baked you alive, forests filled with venomous creatures. Mason chimed in about earthquakes, blizzards, and predators with teeth longer than a Vraxion's forearm. The guards exchanged looks. Jurak's second-in-command, standing behind him, narrowed his eyes. You speak as if these things are common. Are, Mason said with a shrug. Most people deal with them at some point. It's just life. Jurak's voice dropped to a dangerous growl. On most worlds, a single one of these threats would be catastrophic. You call them life? Elena's mouth curved into that faint, knowing smile again. We adapt. The science officer stepped forward with a datapad. Commander, I've run truth scan analysis during their statements. No signs of deception. Jurak stared at the humans for a long moment. Their body language was loose, unconcerned, their heart rates steady. He had interrogated warlords and pirates who broke into pleas after minutes. These two radiated an unsettling calm. Finally, Jurak said, You are either the most reckless creatures I have ever encountered, or the most dangerous. Mason grinned, showing all his teeth. The younger guard unconsciously took a step back. That's the thing, Commander, Mason said. Where we come from, being able to survive the worst isn't unusual. It's just basic. Jurak didn't reply. Not yet. But a thought began to take root in his mind, a thought that would grow far faster than he expected. And for the first time in years, Commander Jurak was beginning to wonder if this was a battle the Vraxion shouldn't start. The observation chamber was silent, except for the faint hum of the low-dash screens. Commander Jurak stood with his arms folded, 4 black eyes locked on the footage playing before him. His second-in-command, Vero, stood stiffly at his side. Around them, several officers watched in uneasy silence as the images shifted from scene to scene, each more baffling than the last. The first clip showed a group of humans scaling the face of a sheer cliff. No safety lines, no anti-gravity, harnesses, just fingers gripping jagged rock while a storm raged around them. Bolts of lightning lit the scene in violent flashes. The humans were laughing. You call this normal? Vero hissed, glancing toward the prisoners holding cell on the other side of the observation glass. On the other side, Captain Elena Voss leaned casually against the wall, arms crossed. She didn't even blink. Pretty standard weekend trip, she said, her voice carrying easily through the comlink. The screen shifted again. Now a human swam through icy water so cold that Vraxion soldiers would be unconscious within minutes. Then came a scene of a man walking calmly along a narrow metal beam hundreds of meters above a city. Another clip showed a human diving deep into the crushing black of an ocean trench, surrounded by strange, glowing predators. Jurak's jaw tightened. What? And these activities are common? Alina shrugged. Not for everyone. What? But plenty of people do things like that. We enjoy a challenge. Brow ridges furrowed. Challenges are meant to test strength. These activities should kill you. That's the point. Sergeant Mason Rourke's voice cut in, dry and amused. If it's easy, it's boring. Jurak turned to the science officer. I confirm. Are these recordings real? The officer's fingers danced across the console. No signs of fabrication. All match known environmental data from the human homeworld. The room fell into a heavier silence. On most worlds, these so-called recreational activities would be considered elite military training or outright suicide. Yet here the humans were, speaking of them as if they were afternoon hobbies. Jurak studied the prisoners through the glass. Lena's posture was relaxed but alert, like a predator at rest. Mason lounged on the bench, one leg stretched out, but his eyes moved constantly. Tracking everything, they seek danger, Jurak murmured to himself. Not because they must, but because they want to. Rose's tone carried disbelief. Commander, what possible reason could a species have for living this way? Alina answered before Jurak could. Because the world we grew up on didn't care if we lived or died. If you wanted to survive, you learned to push yourself. That's just how it is. Jurak's eyes met hers through the glass. There was no arrogance there, no attempt to impress him. It's a calm statement of fact. The commander felt that same flicker of unease he'd first felt in the hangar. He had always thought of his soldiers as the galaxy's finest disciplined, trained, and forged in war. But these humans, they weren't forged in war. They were forged in survival from birth. The holoscreen switched to one last image humans running toward a massive wall of fire, carrying hoses and equipment, while the ground burned beneath them. Jurak's voice was quiet, but every officer heard him. We measure strength by the enemies we defeat. They measure strength by the worlds they endure. In the cell, Mason caught Elena's eye and gave the faintest grin. They could feel the shift in the air, the way the aliens were beginning to realize just what kind of species they were dealing with. And the thought of that seemed to please them. The hazard simulation chamber was a place where fear was manufactured. It was a sealed environment the size of a small city, filled with shifting terrain, climate controls, and hostile life forms bred for training purposes. Only the most elite Vraxion soldiers entered, and even they often emerged injured, exhausted, or broken. Commander Jurak stood on the observation platform, arms folded, as the chamber's systems came online. Harsh winds began to howl through the artificial canyons below. Lightning crackled in the manufactured storm clouds overhead. Pools of acidic rain hissed as they struck the blackened ground. This program has a 92% failure rate, Bureau said, his voice low. Even for our best. That is the point, Jurak replied. His gaze slid to the two humans standing calmly on the loading platform. Captain Alina Voss and Sergeant Mason Rourke had been given light armor and a basic environmental scanner. No weapons, no advanced survival gear, just enough to keep them alive for a few minutes if they were lucky. Your task is simple, Jurak said, his voice carrying over the coms. Survive for one cycle. The hazards will escalate. There will be no extraction until the timer reaches 0. Mason glanced at Alina. What's that? An hour. Alina smirked. Probably their idea of a long time. Jurak ignored the comment and signaled the operator. Heavy blast doors opened with a grinding roar, and the humans stepped inside. The moment they crossed the threshold, the simulation reacted. A sudden gust of acidic rain drove sideways across the terrain, stinging. Exposed skin. In the distance, a rumble warned of something large moving through the canyons. From the observation deck, Vraxion officers leaned forward, expecting the humans to hesitate or freeze. Instead, they broke into a jog, heading for high ground. Mason said, scanning the map. Good, Alina replied. We'll get a lay of the land before it throws anything big at us. The alien officers exchanged confused glances. Prey species typically ran blindly when danger appeared. These two were methodical, calm. Minutes passed. The humans reached a ridge, quickly scanning for threats. When a pair of razor-beaked predator drones appeared from the mist, the humans didn't panic. They used the ridge's edge to funnel them into a narrow gap, then smashed one with a rock the size of a helmet. The other turned to flee, the science. Officer blinked. They improvised a kill with no weapons. It's not in the projections. Jurak didn't answer. He was watching closely now. The simulation escalated. Lava flows burst from the ground, flooding the lower valleys. Acid. Rain intensified. And from the far canyon came the deep roar of something massive. A shadow emerged, a predator unit the size of a small ship, plated in bone armor and equipped with claws like plasma cutters. It was designed to trigger panic even in battle-hardened. Troops thought the humans exchanged a glance. Distraction or kill? Mason asked. Let's see if it's as dumb as it looks, Lena said. They moved not away from the predator but toward it, starting between rock spires and using the terrain to stay just ahead of its claws. The alien officers murmured in disbelief. They're leading it toward the lava flow, the science officer said. Realization dawning. Moments later, the massive predator lunged at Alina. She dove aside at the last moment, and it stumbled into the molten stream. Its armored body sank with a hiss of steam from the observation deck. The silence was absolute. The humans dusted themselves off, breathing hard but steady. Elena glanced toward the nearest camera and gave a short, mocking salute. Jurek's claws tapped slowly against the railing. For the first time, he could feel his soldiers' unease spreading. Vero leaned closer. "Commander, if this is what they can do in a simulation, what do you think they do in the real world?" Jurek didn't answer. He was still watching the humans, two unarmed Deathworlders, smiling in the middle of a killing field. And he was beginning to realize the simulation might not have been a test of them, but of himself. The mess hall of the Vraxion warship was usually filled with the low rumble of voices, the clatter of trays, and the occasional bark of laughter from veterans sharing war stories. Tonight, it was quiet. Dozens of soldiers sat at long steel tables, their meals untouched. Conversations were reduced to hushed whispers, glances darting toward the far corner where two humans sat eating as if they were on a casual lunch break. Captain Elena Voss was calmly slicing through a slab of roasted meat with the precision of someone who knew exactly how sharp her knife was. Sergeant Mason Rourke shoveled food into his mouth with an appetite that suggested he'd been starving for days, though everyone had seen him eat just hours earlier. "They don't look like prisoners," one soldier muttered in the Vraxion tongue. "They look like they own the place," another replied. Across the hall, two junior warriors sat rigid, staring into their bowls. "If this is what they call normal," one whispered, "what happens when they're angry?" The words traveled quickly, passed from table to table. No one admitted to being afraid, but the feeling was there, thick. Unspoken, in the command deck above, Commander Jurek was reviewing reports. The hazard simulation footage had already made its way through the ship, replayed on personal terminals, despite orders to keep it classified. Every soldier had seen the humans outwit, outrun, and outfight challenges that should have crushed them. Vero entered, carrying a datapad. "Morale is shifting, Commander. Some of the troops are asking if our mission parameters are wise." "Didn't look up wise?" "They are questioning whether engaging humans in open conflict is survivable." Jurek's claws paused mid-tap. Vraxion soldiers did not question orders. Fear spread like rot in an army, and once it took hold, it was nearly impossible to root out. "Perhaps," Jurek said slowly, "they need to be reminded of what it means to be Vraxion." Vero hesitated. "And if that reminder fails?" Jurek's gaze shifted to the viewport, where the stars slid silently past. "Then we find out if these humans have a limit." Down in the mess hall, Elena looked up from her plate, as if sensing the commander's thoughts. Her eyes found the nearest security camera, and for a moment she simply stared into it calm, unblinking. Mason leaned back in his chair, wiping his mouth. "They're planning something," he said softly, not looking at her. "Of course they are," Elena replied. She set her fork down and pushed her plate away. "The question is whether they'll survive trying it." The murmur in the hall grew louder, a restless tide of unease rolling through the ranks. No one said it outright, but the thought was spreading, like wildfire through the Vraxion warship. If two unarmed humans could walk among them without fear, maybe the Vraxion weren't the predators anymore. The hangar doors groaned open, revealing the yawning black of the hazard zone beyond. Unlike the controlled environment of the previous simulation, this was no manufactured arena. The kill zone was a real place, an uninhabited planet used by the Vraxion military to cull apex predators too dangerous to be kept in captivity. A place where survival without heavy weapons was measured in minutes. Commander Jurek stood on the loading platform, his officers behind him. The wind from the planet's surface howled up through the bay, carrying with it the distant roars of creatures no civilized world would tolerate. "This is the final trial," Jurek said, his voice amplified so the humans could hear over the noise. "No simulations, no controlled variables. No extraction until you signal surrender." Mason Rourke adjusted the strap of the small pack they'd been given. "So, same as last time," Jurek's tone hardened. "No. Last time was a test. This time is proof." Elena Voss met his gaze evenly. "We'll see whose proof it is." The ramp dropped with a heavy clang. The humans stepped off without hesitation. The Vraxion soldiers watching from the observation deck shifted uneasily, their armor creaking as they glanced at each other. The moment Alina and Mason reached the surface, the planet's chaos greeted them. The sky boiled with swirling red clouds. The ground was cracked and uneven, dotted with steaming vents. In the distance, hulking shapes prowled, massive reptilian beasts with jaws strong enough to shear through armored plating. "Feels like home," Mason muttered, crouching to scoop a handful of dark soil. He sniffed it, frowned, and tossed it aside. Sulfur-rich means there's water nearby. They moved with purpose, weaving between jagged rock formations. Alina kept scanning the horizon. When the first predator appeared, a six-legged brute, with plated armor and eyes like molten gold, she didn't back away. Instead, she picked up a broken shard of metal half buried in the ground. Mason grabbed a length of cracked piping. From the observation feed, the alien officers expected a desperate scramble for safety. Instead, they watched the humans work together with frightening precision. Mason distracted the predator with quick feints while Alina circled wide, finding a gap in its armored plates. One sharp strike later, the beast collapsed. They killed it. Someone whispered. They hunted it. Another corrected. Hours passed. The humans built a small shelter from fallen rock and scavenged debris. They fashioned crude spears. They set traps from stripped wiring they'd salvaged from the ground, and then they did something no one in the observation deck expected. They tamed one of the predators. It was smaller than the others, its back scarred from old wounds. When it approached their camp, Alina tossed it a strip of cooked meat. Mason crouched, speaking in low tones. Within minutes, the creature was lying beside their shelter, eyes half closed. Jurek stared at the feed. His jaw tightened, but his claws had stopped tapping. "Commander," Vero said quietly, "they've been down there for 2 cycles without calling for extraction. Our best troops last." "Less than 1. On the screen, Alina looked up, meeting the nearest observation drone's lens, as if she knew exactly where it was. "This is your proof, Commander," she said into the comms. "Your world is dangerous. Ours is worse." The feed cut to static as a storm swept over the planet. But the last image before the blackout was burned into every Vraxion soldier's mind to humans, standing beside a predator they had tamed, looking utterly at ease in a place where nothing else survived. And somewhere deep inside, Jurek felt the uncomfortable truth settle in. He hadn't broken them. They'd broken his definition of strength. The Vraxion warship hung in low orbit above the kill zone planet, its massive frame blotting out the sun. In the command deck, the atmosphere was different now. The usual hard, disciplined edge of the crew had softened not into weakness, but into something quieter. Caution. Commander Jurek stood at the viewport, watching the surface below. The humans had signaled for extraction at dawn, not because they were beaten, but because they were ready to leave. They had lasted far longer than any alien soldier ever had in that place. Longer than Jurek had thought possible. When the shuttle doors hissed open, Alina Voss and Mason Rourke stepped onto the deck. Their armor was dented and scorched, their makeshift weapons still slung casually over their shoulders. Behind them, padded the scarred predator they'd tamed, its golden eyes scanning the corridor without fear. Every Vraxion soldier they passed gave them a wide berth. Jurek waited until they were standing before him. He studied them in silence for a long moment. The humans didn't fidget, didn't look away. They simply waited, as though they already knew what he was going to say. "You endured," Jurek said at last. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "Through the command deck, you adapted. You overcame. No Vraxion soldier has done the same." Mason shrugged. They had decent company. Patted the predator's neck, earning a low rumble of approval from the beast. Jurek's black eyes narrowed slightly. "In my world, strength is proven in victory. In yours, it is proven in survival." Lena's expression softened into a small smile. "Then maybe our worlds aren't so different. We just started in different places." The commander stepped forward, The motion was deliberate, formal. When he stopped, he brought his arm across his chest and bowed his head slightly. The Vraxion salute. Every soldier on the deck stiffened in shock. For the first time in my career, Jurek said, "I salute an enemy." The word hung in the air for a heartbeat, then he continued, "But you will not remain my enemy. The Vraxion do not fight battles they cannot win. And against Deathworlders, there is no victory." Lena inclined her head. "Alliance, then?" Jurok straightened. "Alliance." The humans exchanged a brief glance. Mason's grin was sharp. "Good choice." By the end of the cycle, a formal accord had been signed. The humans would share survival training and tactics with the Vraxion. In return, the Vraxion would offer their fleets in defense of human worlds. Months later, Vraxion soldiers would still whisper about the day the Deathworlders walked unarmed into their flagship and left with the commander's salute. And long after that, those whispers would harden into a saying, if that was their normal, we dared not ask what extreme looked like.